All right. All right. It's good to be back for some more Tanya. And hopefully this time we'll be able to finish chapter 19. If it's not coming through clear, just let me know. If you saw my email, I wrote, or the text, today's class is about what did I write even? I don't remember anymore. Basically there's the hidden love, and how that hidden love can become revealed is really the discussion of Tanya. And let me start off the class like this, because we're going to delve into it. There is a known fact that Jews are strange. Okay, let me turn off the light behind me. There's a known fact that Jews are strange, and what I mean by that is that we have, you go to other religions, people who don't keep the religion are not too bothered by any tenets of the religion, or if you tell them things about their religion, if they don't keep it, it doesn't really bother them. Jews are very strange. We have many people who are not religious or practicing or whatnot, but if you tell them certain things about their religion or their people, they'll get very upset. And that's just generally looked at as a fascinating fact of life. However, the Tanya really takes this fact and runs with it and uses it as an important way of serving God. It takes this fact, explores it, gets to its depth. 1 second. Thank you, there. Menachem. Okay, sorry. So it takes this fact and it explores its depth. And by exploring its depth, we get to a beautiful way of serving God. So as we mentioned, chapters 18 and on are delving into how to, 1 second, let's see. So this chapter 18 and on is exploring another way that we can get close to God without spending too much time in meditation. So we started off explaining there's something called hidden love. We went deep into what does it mean? It's inherited to us by virtue of our godly soul. And we discussed that we have a level in our soul called chachma. Chachma is the opposite of ego, right? Ego does not allow connection to God. If we have humility, objectiveness, it allows godliness to come into our souls. And it's by virtue of this chachma, this wisdom, which was the key word for objective and humility, that allows our godly soul to shine, and that's our hidden love. But that didn't actually explain why it's hidden. That's really going to be today's discussion. Today's discussion, we're going to say that despite the fact that we have the ability through the chokhmah to all tap into this love that's innate, that's really what we've been describing till now. There's a innate love. In today's chapter, we're going to describe how that love can become hidden. And I want to say that in hidden, there's actually two elements he's going to talk about here. He's going to talk about how there is your love to God can be exiled and your love to God can be hidden. The difference between exiled and hidden is obviously not as bad as exiled. Exiled means someone else has control over you, and hidden means it's just hidden away, you don't see it. So we're going to explain like this. There's the deepest core element of your soul can only be hidden. It cannot be in exile. The expression of your godly soul can be in exile. It's semantics. He's going to describe it. But he's basically going to make the argument in this next section that we all have the ability, by virtue of our godly soul, to that every single Jew, even a irreverent Jew, has a godly soul in them, and that means that technically they can access this deep innate love. However, it's possible that it can either be in exile or it can be hidden. Now, we're going to delve a little bit more into the exile hidden and how that's relevant to us, but first we're going to read a little bit of text, then I'm going to go back to explanation. So let's take a look here at this text. This is like this. Similarly with Rishayim and sinners of Israel. Let me just switch the microphone to and tell me if this is not good enough. But you hear me? You hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah, okay. So this is like this. Similarly with, yeah, okay, good. So similarly with Rishayim and sinners of Israel, before a scenario arises when their dormant love is activated, when they are put to the test to sanctify God's name, convert or die, until that point they lack faith, since the component of Chokhmah in their divine soul, which houses a spark of godliness from the blessed infinite light, is in a state of exile in their bodies. So what this means is, thank you, what this means is that before you get a test of faith, your divine soul can be in a state of exile. So let's explain what that means. While the sinners of Israel do have a spark of God shining through the chokhmah of their souls, that does not necessarily mean they will have faith in God or be drawn to his worship. The light remains blocked and exiled. So again, you have that godly spark within you, but it's in exile. It's being controlled by what? By your animal soul, your ego, as he explains. What's it being controlled by? In the animal soul, which is from Klippa, in the heart's left chamber, and that Klippa rules and dominates the bodies of the Rishayim, the wicked people. As he says, the egocentric nature of the Klippa inspires a self-serving mentality. If it succeeds, I'll explain shortly what's the difference between hidden and exile. Good question. If it succeeds, that sense of unhealthy and self-importance will detach the person from the Chokhmah in his soul, leaving the divine spark within Chokhmah exiled and powerless within him, according to the secret of the Shekhinah's exile, as mentioned above. We mentioned this in previous chapters. As we have explained, the exile of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, can be understood Kabbalistically as referring to the spark of God or Chokhmah trapped inside a sinful person. So it makes sense, actually, when we talk about the Jewish people going in exile. We went in exile originally for our sins. What is our sins? Our sins is... So what is our sins? Our sins are... Let me just ask. Okay, so when we sin, what in effect is happening when we sin? When we sin, we are placing the divine soul that's within us in exile. That means that the divine soul within us is being controlled and pushed down. So then a similar thing happens in the world. God is hidden within no more temple. I'm breaking up. Okay, let me switch to the. There's no more temple. Telling me my internet is stable, so I'll be again. There's no more temple, and so it's an interesting thing. There's, so to speak, micro and the macro exile, right? So we are currently in exile, right? We're in exile. Even if you're in exile, you're in exile, right? Without temple, without a revelation of God in this world, still breaking up. You hear me now? Is it any better? Now? Any better? Not really. Okay. Definitely not the microphone. You hear me now? Any better? I feel like a Verizon commercial. Yes, Baruch. Oh, I see the problem. Hello, Baruch?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You hear me? Okay, good. Okay, good. All right, thank you. All right, so hopefully we're fixed. We're better. Okay, so We are currently in exile. People want to say, what do you mean we're in exile? We have Israel, we have unfortunately, after October 7th, nobody can convince themselves we're not in exile. But ultimately, an exile means a time when God's presence is not revealed. That's what exile means. So what causes God's presence not to be revealed? That the unclean forces are ruling the world. And God's presence is, you could call it hidden, you could call it an exile, and I'll explain the difference between the two in a moment. But you could call it hidden or you could call it an exile. Whichever way it is, it's pushed away. It's not revealing itself. The same thing is in our souls. If our godly soul is shining, then that's great. But when our godly soul is not shining, it's either hidden or in a exile. Okay. But with this in mind, we can now appreciate why the presence of the Chokhmah and the soul can be responsible for a dormant love. Dormant love. This is why this natural inherited love of the divine soul, whose will and desire is to connect with God, the blessed giver of life, is called dormant love, hidden love, because it's hidden and covered by a sackcloth garment of klipa. That's the unclean forces in the cases of sinners of Israel. And it is from this klipa that a delusional spirit enters the wicked to incite them to sin. As the rabbis of blessed memory taught, a man will not commit a sin until a delusional spirit enters him. So this is he put a lot of words in a short period of time. And it's actually very deep. So let me explain a little bit. First, let me explain the difference between a sleep and an exile. Sorry, between hidden and exile. The difference between hidden and exile is like this. Hidden means just not revealed, but not that anybody else is necessarily controlling me. And exiled means that I'm being controlled. So God forbid to say that so exiled means it's there, but it's being controlled. So God forbid to say that our godly soul is being controlled by some foreign force. So the way we understand it is like this. As I mentioned, our soul has many different levels. Some of those levels of our soul are manifest within our body, and some of those levels of our soul are not manifest within our body. So the explanation is like this. The deepest core of our soul, which is not manifest within our body, when we are in a place of sinning, is hidden. It's not revealed in our body. It's hidden, but it's not in exile because it's not inside our body. It's a deep core of our soul that is beyond our body, outside of our body. So we call that hidden. Then there's that godly soul as it shines into us. Even if you're the greatest sinner, that divine soul somewhere inside of you, and that, so to speak, expression or revelation of the divine soul that comes into you, that part of your soul is in a exile because it is found within your body and it's being controlled at that point by your animal soul. So it's a technicality just based on which part of your soul we're talking about. That's why it kind of flips between exile and hidden. It doesn't really explain. But the commentaries and Tanya explain this is the difference. There's the element of your soul that doesn't ever come into your body. It's the deepest core of your soul. So right now it's hidden because it's not revealed within you. But the part of your soul that does come into your body, that's in an exile because it's there, but it's not able to do anything. And so that's just a technical difference between the two. Hopefully that answers the question. So let us understand what's going on over here. You know, we threw out a lot of words over here because, again, Tanya is searching for something called a hidden love. Searching for something called a hidden love. In the previous chapters, we described how every single Jew will have this love. And we have to say that when we say every Jew, we mean even sinners. So if a sinner also has this love, why are they sinning? So he's starting to explain your love is hidden and in exile. And why is it hidden and in exile? It's from the animal soul, which is also called the delusional spirit. It's called the delusional spirit. Oh, actually, I see he explains the difference between hidden and exiled in the next section over here. So let me explain. Why is it called a delusional spirit? So let me explain with a story. I'm sure you've heard many stories of Jews who gave up their lives for God. And many of those stories are very religious people. Many of those stories are not religious people. In fact, there's a story I grew up with. It was called the Yasala the Ganav. Okay, Yasala the Ganav. Yasala the Ganav means Yasala the thief. So Yasala the Ganav. I wonder if it's a Google talks about it, but Yasala the Ganav, and the legend that we were told, and I suppose it's a real story. It's printed a lot of places. Is that on his tombstone it says Yasala the holy thief. Now, how do you become a holy thief? You know, do you steal holy socks? You know, what do you do? So the story goes that Yasala the Ganav was a Jew. He lived in a town of Shpali, and he one day wanted to make it big, so he went to go steal from the church. The church had a lot of money in it, so he went to go steal, and unfortunately, that was the first time he got caught, and the last time he got caught. Stealing from the church in those days was the biggest crime, and he was sentenced to death. And the priest came to him and said, if you convert, we'll spare your life. And the priest convinced him day after day after day, nothing helped. And Yasala the Ganav was executed for the crime of stealing from the church. And he was buried in the cemetery right next to the holy tzaddik of Shpala, the Shpala Zayda. And he was called Yasala the Holy Ganav. Now, it's very strange. Why would Yasala the thief? He wasn't religious. He was a Ganav, right? Okay, stealing is one of the 10 commandments, right? Belief in God is one of the 10 commandments. He doesn't believe in the 10 commandments, supposedly. We assume so, right? I mean, he didn't mind stealing. So why suddenly, when it came to his faith, he's either convert or give up your life, did he give up his life? But this is a common occurrence. I put up here on the screen earlier. I had, the famous line of Daniel Pearl. That Daniel Pearl was not a practicing Jew. Daniel Pearl was killed by ISIS, murdered by ISIS. And the last thing he said in the video before he died, he says, "My mother's Jewish, my father's Jewish, I am a Jew." And it's interesting. So his father, Daniel Pearl's father has gone around the world since then. He wrote a book. He got 147 people to write up articles. What does it mean when you say I am a Jew? What does that even mean? What makes you Jewish? What do you mean I'm a Jew? But those were his last words. And again, he wasn't religious at all. I think he was very, very secular, very. Nevertheless, it was important to him at the moment of his death to mention that he's Jewish. And we find this with a lot of people. A lot of people say, bury me like a Jew. They say, when do people meet the rabbi? They meet, they say rabbis are there to snip him, bar mitzvah him, and bury them. There's three things. Marry them sometimes as well. Sometimes, so rabbis are there. We come to do the snip. We come for the bar mitzvah. We come maybe for a wedding, and we come to bury them. It's like, I was reading an account of a rabbi just the other day. He's like, he was a rabbi of a congregational synagogue, and one of the board members was like trying to depict, how would we want to depict the importance of the rabbi? And he said, let's, depict a picture of the rabbi coming to visit someone in the hospice or on a deathbed. And that's a powerful moment of a rabbi. And the rabbi's like, what do you mean? Am I the angel of death or something? But it's funny. A lot of Jews, they wake up to their Judaism at the last moment, the moment of death. It's not uncommon. And so this is really the idea here, is that this is a fact of life. We know that many Jews, their love of God becomes expressed only in the most extreme places. Now, on the one hand, it doesn't make any sense, right? In other words, if the person is not willing to sacrifice for God for something easy, why would they sacrifice for God for something hard, right? If I'm not willing to fast on Yom Kippur, why would I give up my life, right? If I'm not willing to stay away from ham, why would I give up my life? If I'm not willing to stop stealing, why would I give up my life? So the answer is, of course, as we're describing here, there's something called a hidden love. Let's take an example of a volcano. They have, anybody been to Yellowstone or they have what's called dormant volcanoes. Okay, there's dead volcanoes or whatever that means, but there's dormant volcanoes. There are volcanoes that are, so to speak, considered active, but they're dormant, that they're sitting, you won't see anything, they could explode anytime in the next 500 years. So it's there, but it's dormant. And similarly, a person can be in a dormant state, like someone who's asleep, someone's sleeping. All the person's energies are there, but until you wake them up, they can't do anything about it. So what are some ways to wake someone up? Well, one way is the baby cries. I know that doesn't work for me. No, okay, I'm kidding. There are different ways to wake people up. You could pour water on them. You could call their name. You could set an alarm. There could be a fire. There's all different ways of waking people up. And the same thing goes for our godly soul. Our godly soul is both hidden and exiled, as we explain the difference, as he's going to explain as well here. As long as our godly soul is asleep, we'll put it with the word asleep. It's a nice way of putting it, meaning it's there, but it's asleep. There's a possibility to wake it up. Now, what's going to make it wake up? There are different things. Just like when you wake someone up, you might need to shake them, or an alarm might be enough, or you might need to pour water on them, depending on the depth of their sleep, depending what put them to sleep, if they had some anesthesia or I don't know what. Similarly, when a Jew is asleep, that means their godly soul is hidden. There are different things that can wake it up. For some people, a smaller event can wake it up. But for some Jews, it needs to be a large event. But this is really what the idea is. Why do we find some Jews that only wake up at the last moment? Because it's like someone who's asleep. Even the deepest sleeper, when you do something really crazy, pour water and shake them violently, they'll wake up. And the same thing is with our godly soul, the love that we have within us. Although it could be asleep, and nevertheless, when a extreme event happens, it will wake up. Let's take a look at the text of the Tanya, which explains, once again, this level of chokhmah, the difference between exile and sleeping. It's important, again, I feel this part of Tanya is so important to us, as are the next couple chapters, because this is what we experience. So sometimes we want to know why do I feel so hypocritical? Some days I feel super inspired and some days not. It just depends how awake your godly soul is. And remember, what puts the godly soul to sleep is our animal soul, our self-absorbedness. The more we sit and watch, get self-absorbed.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What can we do to better inspire those whose godly souls are asleep or hidden or in exile? What can we do to better influence them to wake up?
Well, that's exactly what the Tanya is trying to do the next couple chapters. So chapter 18 and 19, let me put it this way. Chapter 18 and 19 is describing that there is a hidden love that can be woken up. Then chapter 20 through 24 will take a long-winded way to find out how we can find and access that hidden love.
Okay. All right.
Now, I know that's not a quick answer. If you want a quick answer, the answer is we don't really ever know what's going to wake someone up. The Tanya is going to try and seek a way that we can awaken our hidden love at will. That's really what the Tanya is going to seek to do. That's why it's a long answer. It's going to be a couple chapters because the Tanya is going to take, now that once we finish establishing in chapter 18 and 19 that there is a love that could be hidden, that you can awake, then it's going to spend a couple chapters trying to find a way that we can awake it at will, because that's the best scenario, right? So, we find all the time, right? We never know what's going to happen. I put on the phone with someone, they awaken. Someone lights Shabbat candles, they awaken. I bring them matzah, they awaken. People awaken for all different reasons. We never really know what it's going to be. So we got to try as many things as we can. But if you want a really good method that maybe takes a little more effort, that's what the Tanya is going to present in these chapters. But you have a good question. We have to find ways to awaken people. But I guess the one takeaway we can walk away with today without getting to the next chapters is just knowing that every Jew has that within them gives us the strength to go ahead and reach out to every single Jew. Tells us I should reach out to someone else because I know that deep within them there is that hidden love and I might be able to awaken it. So that would be my...
Yeah. So maybe to summarize, every Jew has the potential. We don't know the answer. It can't be said in one sentence. In fact, Tanya spends several chapters on it. And you should just be good Jews and encourage people to light Shabbat candles and to do a kosher act. And we don't know what will be the trigger. And that's out of our hands. We just have to be good role models. At least that's the practice that I employ. Not to try to think about it too hard, just try to be a good model. And people will connect when they decide to connect. It's up to them.
Right. I mean, hopefully you can play a role in poking them just as waking someone up. But ultimately, you never know what's going to be that, like you said, you don't know what's going to be that ultimate trigger for them to wake them up. Unless you can get them, unless you can get them to study the Tanya chapters 18 to 25, then you'll also be good.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so let's read here. So really we're setting the stage here is really what David has brought out here. We're setting the stage here. We haven't even gotten yet to a method of how to wake up your love, but the Tanya really gets to the depth of everything. That we do have this hidden love. All right, so let's continue reading. Having emphasized how the divine spark in Chokhmah remains exiled and powerless in the sinners of Israel, the Tanya now stresses that it is never extinguished. And this is an important point, as we said a moment ago, to have that belief that every single Jew always has that spark. As he says, this exile, the soul's component of the Chokhmah, is only true of the Chokhmah's energizing influence on the rest of the soul. But the root and core of the divine soul's component of Chokhmah remains untrapped in the brain. This is a little deeper way of saying what I said earlier. There's a deeper part of your soul that does not enter your body. That part, the root of your soul, is not trapped because it's not in your body. As he says, and does not actually become exiled and enmeshed in the sackcloth garment of Klippa in the heart's left chamber. The exile of an entity implies that it is A, present in a certain location, and B, yet stripped of its power and forced into activities against its will. Tanya clarifies here that it's only Chokhmah's energizing influence, meaning the influence of the Chokhmah, that remains both present and powerless within the sinful parts of the person's left side of the heart. The root and core of the Chokhmah, however, is located in a part of the body uncontaminated by the Klippa, the seat of the divine soul in the brain. Therefore, it would not be correct to say that the root and core of the Chokhmah is exiled, since it is not present in the location of Klippa. It is merely dislocated for the rest of the person, unable to have any effect. We kind of explained that kind of like your brain, which is the seat of your Chokhmah, is like the window to your body, your soul, so to speak. It's kind of stuck up there. He says, rather with wicked people, it is as if the Chokhmah were asleep, failing to have an effect on them. It's home turf, the brain remains at full force, just doesn't have any significant effect beyond that. So it's effectively asleep. Chokhmah remains asleep in wicked people so long as their das and bina are preoccupied with worldly pleasures. And that's the part that we have to focus on. It's the worldly pleasures that take us out of our natural zone. It's the worldly pleasures, when we spend too much time in them, that cloud our the ability of our godly soul to have an effect in our body. Why? Because worldly pleasures in its nature is self-serving. And this goes back to previous chapters. Can one, and I guess this actually answers a question that's asked a lot of times when I teach the Tanya or any part of Hasidus. People keep on saying, what's wrong with pleasure? Didn't God put it in this world? Why do you keep bashing pleasure? What's so bad about it? The nature of worldly pleasures, or pleasure in general, is self-serving. That's the ultimate issue with pleasure. If you can use your pleasure in a non-self-serving manner, then kudos to you. It's not a problem, as the Tanya explains in chapter 7. If you tell jokes to get people to open their mind towards the Torah subject, then that's fine. If you eat good meat so that your mind is open to studying deeper, that's fine. But that's the exception. Generally, pleasure, as most people use it and is commonly used, is self-serving. And I don't know why it's coming to me with such a clarity right now, but I guess as we discussed the Tanya, things get clarified. But that's, I think, the ultimate way to explain the Tanya's issue with pleasure. It's not that pleasure inherently is bad, but pleasure is naturally self-serving. And anything that's self-serving is feeding your ego and naturally not godly centric. So even if I am not sinning, I'm just focusing on self-pleasure. At the end of the day, what I'm doing at that moment is serving myself, serving my ego, and automatically that will push away my godly soul. So what that means is practically, if I spend too much of my day on worldly pleasures, I will find it difficult to connect to God, because that's, in essence, putting my godly soul to sleep. And so if we want to reach our hidden love, I guess to answer one of David's questions, is to do something that's not self-serving. Maybe that's why we find that when a Jew does a mitzvah, maybe eating matzah, putting on tefillin, lighting Shabbat candles, suddenly their godly soul wakes up, because suddenly they're not doing a self-serving action. They're doing an action which is serving God. And so that gives a moment for their godly soul to shine. They're putting aside their ego. Their ego says, I should, this rabbi stopped me on the street to put on tefillin. This person's asking me to, why do I don't need to do this. Like, for my own personal life, I don't need to spend the extra 5 minutes to put on tefillin. I don't need to spend extra 5 minutes to pray. I don't need to spend money on these Shabbat candles and light them. I don't need to make a Shabbat dinner. Whatever it is in your life, I don't need to go to synagogue. All these things that we do, that might be a reason why mitzvot sometimes have that ability to allow our godly soul to awaken, because at that moment we're not being self-serving. This also, by the way, explains, on the other hand, which the Tanya also explained earlier, it's possible you can be religious self-serving. For example, if you're studying Torah so that people will respect you, or you're praying so that people will look at you and think you're a pious person, and all these different things. That's why, as well, one can do religious acts in a self-serving manner, and it will affect how much those religious acts will affect you, because you're bringing in your animal soul into that action. You will prevent, to some extent, your godly soul from being able to affect you. Of course, you should still do the action, because it's, at the end of the day, a good action. But again, we're in the Tanya. We're trying to become better, right? We're trying to become better Jews. I'm not telling you shouldn't do a religious action that's self-serving. I'm telling you should, but we're in the Tanya. We're trying to learn how to become better. So what I'm telling you is, well, better than that is to do a religious action, not self-serving. Why? Because you want to allow your godly soul expression, and your godly soul does not express itself when it is, or not fully, when there's an element of self-serving. All right, so let's continue here. As we have learned in chapter 3, for an idea to give rise to an emotion, 3 mental processes are required: chokhmah, inquiry; bina, cognition; and das, recognition. Even in the case of Rashayim, the root and core of their chokhmah remains pure and intact, but chokhmah fails to influence the heart because bina and das have been contaminated with an obsession of physical gratification. So what he's saying here is that the lower levels of your intellectual capacity can be contaminated. But when Rishayim, wicked people, are confronted with a test of life and death in a matter of faith, which transcends any logical consideration of das, that test touches the soul directly, reaching its component of chokhmah. So this is what we said earlier. When you come to a test of faith, there is no longer a you don't think too much. Okay, thinking gets in our way too much. So since there's no logical consideration, because your logic has been contaminated, you can, so to speak, leapfrog to get to the deepest element of your soul. Let's read this paragraph here, and then I'll get to the comments. In day-to-day life, the klipa, contaminated powers of bina and dat, successfully offer all sorts of rationalizations to Rishayim, wicked people, as to why they ought to indulge in sinful behavior, effectively blocking chokhmah from doing its work. And chokhmah, as we said earlier, is just a window to your soul. But when it comes to an overt test of faith, which is clearly not a rational decision applicable to bina or das, these cognitive powers are bypassed and the decision rips directly through to the chokhmah. Then the chokhmah awakens from its sleep and it does its work, arousing the faith, using the power of God invested in it. As the verse states, then God awoke from the sleep. This enables a person to succeed in a test of faith in God without using any of reasoning or knowledge or fathomable intellect to prevail over the klipot in this worldly temptation, which he has been accustomed to, whether they be permitted or prohibited, and even to despise them, realizing now that they separated from God. So at that moment of the test of faith, you, so to speak, leapfrog your cognition, and you will not look at any worldly temptations, will not tempt you. How often did it happen? There's many stories, right? They were offered, if you convert, you'll be able to get business and you'll get to marry this beautiful Christian girl and this and that. And it didn't mean anything to them because they were not, that all that is logic, right? But you can only tempt yourself with logic when you're in a logical place. The way he seems to be saying here is that when you get to a deep test of faith, so to speak, you've reached the deepest level of your soul, which is not logic. Why is it not logic? What did we explain? What is logic? Logic means the reason why I'm doing something is for a reason. If I can reach to the deepest part of my soul, to my godly soul, it's who I am. It's not logical, right? Just as a parent cares for their child, it's not logical. Their child can be terrible, horrible, but the parent will ultimately always care for their child, no matter what their child does, because it's their child. Okay, so you can't explain to them out of it, right? There's no logic. The same thing here. When we reach the deepest level of our soul, you come to the guy, you come to Yasala the Ganav. It doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? We'll give you money. You'll be a nice Christian. You just convert, and we'll save your life, right? What do you mean? He's been stealing his whole life to make his life better. He wouldn't want to give up his life for Christianity. What's going on here? Now we understand. You've reached a place where there's no logic. It's the core of who you are. If you reach the core of who you are, logic cannot overcome that. What's interesting is that the Tanya, let me read this before I tell you that. In a radical break from a lifelong attachment to physical gratification, like Yasala the Ganav, this person disregards all rational considerations and chooses to suffer the pain of death so as not to transgress God's will. His chokhmah is suddenly woken up from its dormant state and provided him with a surge of faith. The arousal of the chokhmah empowers him to choose God as his portion and his lot, to give up his life for God, to sanctify God's name rather than transgress. And as he continues, for even though the klipos had prevailed over him all his life, and like an addict, he has been powerless against them, as our rabbis of blessed memory taught that Rishayim, wicked people, are controlled by their hearts. Nevertheless, when it comes to a unambiguous test of his faith in the one God, a faith which even Rishayim, wicked people, has its foundations in the holy peaks, this refers to the divine soul's component of Chokhmah, in which the blessed infinite light is present. Then as soon as his Chokhmah awakens, all the klipos are rendered null and void. As I explained, the klipos affect your logical level. But if you reach the deepest level, there's nothing to talk about. But what's interesting is, just to point out, that some Jews face the test of faith, and then when they're saved from it, they go back to their old ways. Why? Because no longer is that deep, I'll quote it, illogical core of ourself revealed. As long as that illogical core of ourself is revealed, any worldly pleasures will not affect us. In fact, there were many Jews, it says, who were who were more religious when they were in Russia under communism than when they left. Okay, not everybody, but it says that some Jews became, so to speak, they cooled down a little bit when they left communism. Why? Because their faith wasn't being tested on a day-to-day basis. We could see the same thing today, right? October 7th has woken up a lot of Jews. But if things go back to normal and the world starts loving us again, okay, many Jews would allow their inspiration to slide back to where it was before. What's happened is that the world has forced us to tap into our deep inner core. The world has forced us to connect to, oh, I'm a Jew, and that's my ultimate truth. no more like pretending, whatever, I'm like everybody else. We recognize that we're different, and we have this deep Jewish inner core, and that's why so many Jews have awoken, but that can disappear as well when times get easy again. Some order key to achieving happiness is the realization that serving others bring the most joy, even more than watching sports and eating steak. Yep, very good. Though I will say, serving others, of course, you mean not only in actuality, but in intention. As I mentioned before, just as in religious actions, we can serve others so that I can be respected. I can help others so that people will look at me and say, wow, look, Rabbi's a nice guy. He helps other people. Of course, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't help others for a self-serving reason, but if we want to gain the best benefit from any of these things, we want to bring both intention and action together. And the Tanya gets into intention in greater depth later on in the Tanya. But anyways, yes, but it's a good point. Yes, that's why many people who find greater happiness when they start to serve, when they start to help others, that's where they find the ultimate happiness. That's why so many rich people open up charities, not just for the tax benefits. Okay, so here he's going to, in this section, he's going to quote 4 verses that talk about, so to speak, evil dispersing in the face of God. And that's the same thing that happens when we allow our godly soul to reveal. The evil, so to speak, melts away. So let's read this. Then it is as though they had never been literal. Then it is though they had never been literally, since the klipos are voided in the presence of God that shines through the chachma, as the verse states. All the wicked nations are like nothing before him, and it is written, for behold your enemies, O God, for behold your enemies will perish, all evildoers will scatter. We say that in the Shabbat prayers. And it is written, as wax melts before fire, so will the wicked perish before God. We also mention that in Shabbat prayers. And it's written, mountains melt like wax before you, God. That's also mentioned in Shabbat prayers. So now next time you read these lines in your prayers and you read about evil melting before God, recognize that can happen in your own soul too. If you allow your godly soul expression, poof, it all melts. The Tanya cites 4 verses indicating the elimination of the klipos, corresponding to 4 divisions of klipa. All right, I'm not going to continue reading. He basically says there's 4 levels of the klipot. That's why he brings 4 verses. All right, so let's continue. Now the light of the blessed, let's turn the page. The light of the blessed infinite one, present in the soul's chachma, has such great and awesome power that it will expel and drive away the sitra acha and the klipot, even from touching the soul's garments, which are thought, speech, action associated with faith in one God. What this means is that not only when we come to a point of faith, we don't want to, in our minds, we don't want to be disconnected from God. We wouldn't even do something externally that would disconnect us from God. So for example, even if we were to say, I'm going to officially accept, Christianity, Islam, or whatever it is, without actually believing it, as happened in the famous story of Hanukkah, Hannah and her 7 sons, right? The 7th son, the king told him, I'm going to throw my ring on the floor. You bend down to pick up the ring, and everybody will think you're bowing down to the idol, but you're just picking up the ring. And he said, no, because when our deepest element of our soul is revealed, it touches every element of us, not only our soul powers, but also the garments of our soul, even action. We will not do anything, even in just an outward action, that would seem to contradict our belief in God. Let's continue. That is to say, an awakened chachma will inspire a person to give up his life, even to save himself from doing a mere empty act that is contrary to the faith in one God, such as bowing down to an idol, even though in his heart he doesn't believe in it at all. And likewise, he will be willingly to give up his life to avoid verbally attesting to mistruth about God's unity, God forbid, right? So he wouldn't even say anything. He wouldn't even verbally accept it. Even though his mouth would not be consistent with his heart remaining completely faithful to God. For an act of worship to be real, action must be aligned with intention. If a person believes in God and merely carries out an empty act of idol worship to save his life, there is no deep betrayal here, but the act is nevertheless forbidden by Jewish law. Observers certainly will not know what is in the person's heart when he bows down to the idol, and the act gives the perception of real idol worship. Not wanting to bring even this false perception into the world, the person chooses to die instead. This is the intensity of the faith that an awakened chokhmah can bring. We'll read the final passage and I'll tell you a story. In the final passage of chapter 19, the Tanya addresses the question D posed in the previous chapter. How does the inherited dormant love present in every Jew also include the capacity for reverence? So he says this willingness to die for God as a result of an awakened chachma is called reverence that is contained in love. You know, as we said, we have an inner love. That's our inner godly soul that wants to connect to God. That same inner love is also afraid to disconnect from God. So that's called reverence. It's afraid. It's fear. It's just a different level of emotion. That's why we are willing to give up. That's why we're willing to give up our life for God. I'm not going to read the paragraph here. This comes naturally to the divine soul found in all Israel, since its innate desire and will is to be attached to its root and source, the blessed infinite light. And as a result of this love and will, the soul has a natural aversion to and trepidation of even the slightest association with the impurity of idol worship, God forbid. In other words, you have to have a reverence as well. Let's take a spousal relationship. In a spousal relationship, you love your spouse. But what will prevent you from doing something that even looks wrong, right? Even if it's not actually wrong, is because you don't want to do it. It's more of a fear type of feeling. You don't want to do anything that would even give off the impression that you're disconnecting from God. If it's all about love, like what's the big deal? I still love my wife, right? But what's the problem if I do this thing that may seem outwardly incorrect, right? But you have a trepidation, so to speak. There's a fear in there of doing anything that would even slightly disconnect you. So that's the same thing here with our love of God. Because we love God so much, we have a trepidation of doing anything that would even, so to speak, conflict with our faith, which is in conflict with the faith in God. As we have seen, this is even where the association with idol worship only involves the soul's outer garments of speech and action, without any faith whatsoever in the heart. So what's the story I want to tell you? The story I want to tell you is like this. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, writes in his memoirs. By the way, I'm sorry I went a little quick at the end, but I gave you all the points and I wanted to really start chapter 20 already, because otherwise I'm going to be repeating myself. You know, because again, the Tanya has to explain it in certain ways. I explained everything outside. What is so the story of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Rebbe's father-in-law. The story was that one time he was traveling on a train in Germany, and he saw this wealthy Gentile sitting across him, and he was eating a ham sandwich or something. It's probably a funny story. Today, my son Menachem had a reading test, and so it had a bunch of pictures of items, and it said, put all the items that have the ah sound in it, or the a sound, I forget exactly, and put it in the box. Now, one of the pictures in the items was a piece of ham. He was supposed to put in the box, but he had no idea what it was. He asked me, Tati, what's this? Like, he doesn't know what it was. So anyway, so it's a little funny. Anyways, so he saw this Jew across him sitting and eating, eating not non-kosher. But the guy, as he spotted the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he looks at him and he says, "Are you a grandson? Are you a son or a grandson of the Rebbe Maharash?" The Rebbe Maharash was the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandfather. He says, "Are you by any chance related to him?" And he says, "Yes, I'm his grandson." And right away, the guy got up, and he started to cry, and he left the train. And this was back in the day when they had trains with sleeping quarters, and so a couple of hours later, the guy came to the previous Rebbe, to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and said, maybe I could put on tefillin. He put on tefillin. Then he told the Frierdiker Rebbe a story, and he says, when I was a young child, I grew up religious, and maybe even grew up Chabad. And but as time went on, I got involved, peer pressure and everything. I left the ways of Judaism. But he says that at some point in my life and my activism, I was involved in certain activism that would be helpful for people at large and the Jewish people as well. And as part of my activism, as not from a religious visit, but as part of my activism, I went to visit the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Chabad Rebbe, to get his assistance. The Rebbe Maharash was very instrumental in helping Jewish people. So he went, they had the meeting, and at the end of discussing the business matters, the Rebbe Maharash started to talk to him about his religious life. And then he told him that, he spoke to him, you got too involved in physicality, that's what's happening. But then he told him, he says, remember this, it says that if you throw a stick in the air, it will land on its root. meaning everything always returns to its root. And so then the Rebbe Marash told him, a person can go around and around in life. They can go around for 50 years, but they always have to, but there's always an end, says the Rebbe Marash. There's always an end to your burning desires. And the Rebbe Marash told him, remember who you are, and remember, don't forget where you're from and who raised you. And this gentleman turned to the Frierdiker Rebbe and told him, this was a meeting I had with the Rebbe Marash, with your grandfather 50 years ago. Imagine that today, it's 50 years later. And here I meet you. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was a spitting image of his grandfather. And and that's when this guy's life changed. So he went 50 years, involved in his animalistic soul, but he just seeing the previous Rebbe reminded him of the story 50 years ago. And as the Rebbe Marash told him, there's an end to how long your pleasures of life can take you. And he totally turned around his life at this old age, and he dropped it all, and he became religious again. So what's the idea? Is that this gentleman had the hidden love to God hidden in him, and it was hidden for 50 years, but it's always has the ability to become revealed. And so that's really the takeaway of chapter 18 and 19, which we finished today, is that we all have this hidden love. We know we have it, and we know empirically, because we know of this idea that many Jews will give up their life for God, even if they're irreverent their entire lives. And now that we have this knowledge, number one is, as we said earlier, we should find ways to awaken it. And we also learned today, we should remember when we do self-indulgent actions, pleasurable self-indulgent actions, when we delve into pleasurable items, which are generally self-indulgent, that may hide our godly soul. And we should know that every Jew around us has a godly soul that we can awaken. How can we personally awaken our godly soul whenever we want? That's going to be the discussion of the next chapters. But ultimately, the more positive actions we do will always give us, hopefully, a better shot at awakening our godly soul. So we're going to end here. Hopefully you've walked away with a good understanding that we do have a godly soul that's always there. We can try and reveal it at all different times. And the Tanya will give us a method for revealing it. But in the meantime, we know the basic idea that doing actions that are not self-indulgent allow our godly soul to shine in our lives. So thank you for coming, and I will stop the recording.
Yeah, Shekoach, Rabbi.
Thank you.